Kroger Delivery has one mission: to deliver the freshest food right to your door. That's why our drivers are pros. Our trucks are refrigerated. And when it comes to low prices, we always deliver. With $20 off your first order of $75 or more, there's no better time to get in on the action. Mission accomplished. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
Seriously, Diane, was Colgate your secret to winning Best Smile back in high school?
Yep, and it still is. I even work overnight.
Huh?
Colgate's Optic White Overnight Whitening Pen works overnight. So after 1 week, I can show up confident and reunion ready.
And here I was bragging about my kids.
Colgate Optic White. Find it at all major retailers.
Hey all you heroes, hawks, heralds, crows, pirates, and wardens. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we unpack, discuss, and galaxy brain about all the lore behind the Dragon Age series.
We are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe, from character deep dives to exalted marches and elven gods. We will cover it all.
There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we talk about Dragon Age and its lore. I'm one of your hosts, Austin, also known as Teacup.
And I'm your other host, Shelby or Shecup.
And we are here and back with another Dragon Age Lorecast episode. And today is a very, very special day because as you are listening to this and it has gone live, Dragon Age the Veilguard is officially released.
Yes. I mean, if you are listening to this episode on the day that it drops, today is launch day. Depending on your time zone, there's a little wiggle room there. But if you're listening to this after several days or weeks or even months after we released it, then obviously the game has been out for a while. But yeah, it's such a huge thing, and kind of can't even believe that this day is here, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, I know. And just a note, if you are one of our patrons and listening early, the game might not be out for you yet. But yeah, so that's really exciting. Well, in preparation for this game, especially for those of you who might be releasing to this maybe before, depending on time zones, before this game has been released, you might still be in preparation mode. And so today we are going to do a recap of the Vows and Vengeance podcast, audio drama podcast.
Yeah, so if you're not aware, this podcast came out starting in August up through the release. So it just ended, and basically each episode, except for the first one, each episode highly features one of the companions. The first episode has Nev in it, but she's like it's not technically her episode. So each episode is a little bit of a deep dive or a preview or, whatever into what that companion is like, and a little bit of an information into their backstory and their character, who they are. So some of them I'm like, okay, yeah, you are exactly who I expected you to be. And then others I was pleasantly surprised by. So let's just dive right in.
Just going to add, I feel like this is very similar to the short stories that were released of all the DA2 companions, because I believe those were all released before the game as well.
Yeah, this is the Veilguard version of that, I feel. I do feel like we get a little bit more. We get more from this podcast than we did from those short stories, because it also does. It's not just about the companions. It has an overarching narrative arc with some new characters. And so we'll get into all of that now. And before we do dive into the general info and the story, I do have one fun fact. And that fun fact is that there is some chanting that occurs in episode 1 that's actually lyrics from the Dragon Age Origins original soundtrack song, I Am the One, which I found to be a nice little callback, and I would not have noticed that if it wasn't already called out on the fandom site. So thank you.
Yeah. And I believe there is also, in my research I found, I didn't listen to it, but I found that there is an I Am the One track on the Dragon Age Inquisition original soundtrack too.
Is it the same track?
I have no idea if it's the same track because I didn't listen to it, but I like briefly went, when I saw this, I was like, I don't remember this song, so I looked it up to go listen to it to get a kind of feel for it.
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but let's just dive into the general information about this one. So the first thing is that this was published from August 29th, 2024 through October 17th, 2024. And it was written by Will Melton and Jeremy Novick with some support from BioWare developers Mary DeMarle and John Epler. So the first thing to note, and this will be important later at the end of the episode, the primary writers for this podcast are not BioWare employees. They kind of contracted the writing out to these other two people. And there are some lore discrepancies where that shows, but we'll get into that at the end of the episode. So the general outline of the show, it does follow reformed thief Nadia Carcosa, her partner Elio Andante, a Tevinter Altus mage, and another person that Nadia meets throughout the show named Drayden. So Nadia is voiced by Mae Whitman, who's actually a pretty famous actor. Drayden is voiced by Brigitte Lundy Payne, and Elio is voiced by Armin Taylor, and all of the companions are voiced by their voice actors. So with that, I think we're ready to get into episode 1.
Yeah.
So we'll kind of do this like we've been doing all of our other book club episodes. And I'm just going to basically treat like each episode as its own arc because that's what it is. And so I will give my little summary of the episode and then we can kind of discuss our reactions, what we liked, what we didn't like, whatever. And we'll talk about lore discrepancies at the very end. So save those. So the first episode is titled Once a Thief, and it begins in Minrathous when Elio proposes to Nadia. Nadia, a Liberati, is unsure about marrying a Magister. She keeps the ring he proposes with, but she doesn't wear it on her finger. Then she hears about a job, which is basically retrieving this sacred artifact called the Eye of Cthiska. Elio tries to dissuade her from this, but as you can imagine, she is not. She continues. And they're ended up being caught by Templars, and Elio is accused of treason. They escape with a little help from Nev Gallus, but Nadia takes the artifact with her anyway, knowing that they will need the gold they can get from it. Later on, Nev confronts them again, but Venatori ambushed them. The Eye of Cthiska interacts with Elio's magic and causes a huge explosion, and they flee in the ensuing chaos. Nadia and Elio head on to the Silent Plains to find Nadia's friend's buyer, the person who organized this whole entire job for the artifact. As you might have guessed, the buyer is none other than Solus, the Dreadwolf.
It was Solus all along.
Yes, precisely. So Solus tells them that the Eye of Cthiska was crafted by a powerful dreamer by the name of Andante, Elio's ancestor. Elio basically is convinced by Solus's talk of regeneration and all of this information about the artifact. And so Solus is like, I need your help to fix this, and it's going to be your last chance to like make a change in the world for the better. And Elio agrees, and they start this ritual. As you can guess, as which happens with Solus quite often, the ritual goes wrong, and Elio ends up trapped in the Fade. Solus and Nadia are able to escape the ritual, and she wakes up alone on the plains. Solus is nowhere to be found. So she returns to Minrathous, and her friend Olin gives her a little bit more information about this Solus. Hoping to get him to help get Elio back from the Fade, she follows Solus, supposedly, rumors have it, to the hinterlands. And that's kind of the end of episode 1.
I just have one question, really, from this episode that gets me. How many random ass artifacts are just floating around Teventer?
I mean, I think there are a lot, because throughout the rest of this, there are quite a few more.
Yeah, it just is like, and it just makes me wonder, like, because a lot of times we're like, oh, this is an ancient Teventer artifact or something like that. But is it actually an ancient Teventer?
Exactly.
Or is it an Elven artifact?
Well, I would lean toward most likely most of them are going to be ancient Elven artifacts. And we see this in Bellara's episode where there are multiple in her episode alone. So we'll get there. We'll get there. But other reactions to this first episode?
I did have a little like reaction, just a little bit in here of like in new media. So we're talking about new media, which if we get into, we've gotten a couple short stories, and then Absolution, and now this podcast is really like new post-Inquisition media.
Comics.
Oh, and some comics, yeah, the comics. But are Nadia and Miriam not like the same trope of character?
I see similarities for sure between the two of them, but I feel like Nadia, I like Miriam more than I like Nadia. Not that I dislike Nadia, but I do feel like they embody very different sectors of Teventer culture and life. You know, like Miriam is a slave. Nadia, however, is a liberati. She's not a slave, but she's extremely poor. And in some ways, I wouldn't say that she had it worse necessarily than someone who is enslaved, but I would say she probably had to struggle more, because at least if you're a slave in a wealthy household, like, you know, you're going to be fed, you know, you're going to have somewhere to sleep. I do not believe Nadia had those same kind of privileges.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comparison. I just saw that just because they're both like thieves and very rogue-esque and
angry,
which
yeah.
both characters rightfully angry, rightfully pissed off at the world.
Yeah. Another thing I think is interesting is like I am kind of the opinion that Nadia is an elf, but like we never get true confirmation of that.
No, but I do agree that she is very like elf coded.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's just that we tend to think of rogues as elves, in my mind at least.
I don't know. Okay, what other thoughts do you have on episode 1?
Elio is really interesting to me, and just like, because he's not really like this. He is a magister, but he's not like what we think of when we think of a magister. Like, I think we think of two categories. We think of Dorian Palvis, and then we think of Boogeyman Magister. Mm-hmm. And those are our two categorizations of Teventer Magisters. I don't think Elio really fits either of those categories, but which I like that kind of difference. But when he's over here and like Solus is like, oh, here's an option to change the world, I'm like, so you would drink the Kool-Aid, like 100%. Like you would drink the cult Kool-Aid.
Yeah, that's probably fair. I do think that Elio is more in line with the Dorian and Maevaris's of Teventer than he is, you know, some of the bad guys of Teventer, because I think he does want to change the world. I think he does want Teventer to be better than it is. And so I feel like he would get to where Dorian and Maevaris are eventually, but I do feel like I think he thinks Teventer can be reformed. And I think that Dorian and Maevaris are like, no, we've got to burn this shit down.
Yeah, I think I would probably agree with that as well. But it is just, I think it's that naive kind of aspect. And like, with all of that has happened in the world of Thetis, some random entity is going to say like, hey, if you just like do this weird ritual with me, we'll change the world.
Right.
And it is like, it's so interesting to me, especially given like how it ends and what we learn about Elio later, of like, he's so against her stealing the eye, But when Solus is like, oh, let's use this eye, he's like, okay, yeah, like this is my destiny.
Yeah, because he's like convinced him like, oh, well, this was your ancestor, so this is your responsibility to fix.
I don't know. I think Solus always knew this ritual was going to fail. And it was just an effort to weaken the veil, as we'll see later on in the episodes.
Yeah, that's fair. Any other thoughts about episode 1?
I don't think so.
All right, well, let's move on to episode number 2. Okay, so episode number 2 is called The Cult of the Doomblade, and this is Harding's episode. So Nadia encounters Lace Harding in the hinterlands fighting a demon. After helping her, they both discover they're tracking Solus. And so they kind of decide to go together. Nadia starts hearing Elio's voice, however, which is never a good sign. And so Nadia passes out from what appears to be a seizure. When she wakes up and begins to explain what just happened, Harding and Nadia hear screaming. It's a cultist group about to perform a ritual sacrifice for a demon, I assume, though we never get confirmation, and its name is the Deathless One. Against Harding's advice, Nadia charges in without a plan, forcing Harding to assist her. While they successfully rout the cultists, the leader does escape, and one of the two captives marked for sacrifice, Elisa, is killed. The other, Drayden Keel, berates Nadia for charging in and getting Elisa killed, saying that they had been studying the cult for a year and that they had a plan to escape. The villagers are all extremely upset that they interrupted the ritual, fearful as to what the consequences will be. When the mayor hears from Drayden that Nadia and Harding alone routed all of the cultists, she asks them to help defend the village, saying that it's their chance to be free. At Harding's urging, Nadia accepts, and so they spend the next few days training the villagers. Thanks to their training and Drayden's shock bombs, the villagers successfully defeat the cultists. Before leaving to rejoin Varric Tethras on a mission, Harding tells Nadia that there have been earthquakes in the southern Anderfells, a sign of the Dread Wolf's presence. As Nadia prepares to leave, she reveals to Drayden that she's on a mission to save Elio, her partner, from the Fade. As an expert on the subject, apparently, Drayden offers their help. And so the two head out together. And that's the end of this episode.
Yeah, I don't think this episode isn't one of my favorites. I obviously like...
It is or it isn't?
It isn't. I love Harding, and I love all the story. But I did think it was interesting, the Deathless One, because everyone like freaked out and be like, oh, is this one of the forbidden ones? Because that one was named the Formless One, I believe, is it's the fourth forbidden one, other things. But I kind of have a theory that it's one of the Magisters, because Corypheus goes around calling himself the Elder One.
True. That's true. That's a really good point. I also think it could be one of the Forgotten Ones.
Like the elven... The
ancient, quote-unquote, elven evil gods. Not the Ebenuris. The other ones.
The ones that are... The Dalish believe are the evil ones.
Yeah, I think... I do think it could be the fourth forbidden one, though. Because its name was the Formless One. So I do think it's possible, but I lean more toward either one of the Forgotten Ones or... as you have said, one of the Magisters.
Mm-hmm.
So,
because I mean, there's an old saying that it's a rabbinic saying that says once is happenstance, twice is a coincidence, three times is an act of God. And we've had two Tevinter Magisters. We know that like have survived and lived on in kind of Darkspawn, and like depending on what you decide at the end of Awakening, the architect could still be alive.
That's true. Though I don't think they'll bring him back. Just
I don't either.
FYI. So I do think this episode really establishes Nadia's character a bit more than the first one, because we really see her recklessness. We see her refusal to listen to people. We see her headstrongness. Like, she's so convinced that she's right and she's the only one that can be right. And I think that can be a really good characteristic sometimes. But in this episode, it was not a good characteristic. It kind of hurt potentially these villagers, but it ended up being fine in the end. That was kind of my takeaway from this episode. And I think also notable to mention, we do meet Drayden, who will be in every single episode remaining.
Mm-hmm. Books, if you will.
Yes, that's his nickname. And we'll get to the nicknames at the end.
I actually kind of expected a little more conflict between Nadia and Harding than there was.
Mm-hmm.
Just because Nadia is reckless and kind of like charges in and like scout Harding. Her whole shtick is she is the one who is going into all of these places and scouting out for the Inquisition to be like, okay, here's what's up. Here's the lay of the land. Here's what you need to do.
That's true. That's a good point. Do you have more to say on episode 2, or are we ready to go to 3?
I think we're ready to go to 3.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so in episode 3, this one is titled A Deadly Descent. And as you might be able to guess, this one is Davrin's episode. And it opens with a group of people digging in the deep roads in the Anderfells at the behest of an unseen elf, who we can guess is Solus. There is some kind of creature down there with them, and they all freak out and leave. We then move to a chantry brother outside of a bar admonishing people for their pride, where Nadia is asking questions of the patrons about Solus. She finds out that there's been earthquakes deep in the mountains, and another patron gives her a map to where Solus was camping. Then she gets into a fight with some angry men, and they get kicked out of the bar. That's when Davrin and a fellow warden named Goff show up. They are nearby, not quite at the bar, but they're in the Anderfells hunting for griffins because there have been rumors of the appearance of griffins as of late. They happen upon the patrons who had found a wanted poster of Nadia and told them about the darkspawn crawling all over the mountains. Davrin and Goff head that way. Nadia and Drayden are searching for Solus's camp when they do happen upon darkspawn. And Davrin and Goff appear and help them dispatch the darkspawn. Drayden has a crush on Davrin, which is so relatable. And after the fight, the bar patrons, they do catch up and they want to arrest Nadia. Davrin's suspicious when she mentions the Dread Wolf because he's originally Dalish, though a Grey Warden now. And he wants to take her back to Weishaupt under custody. When she tells Davrin that Elio is trapped in the Fade, he asks if the Inquisition knows about it. Ultimately, they decide to unchain Nadia and Drayden so that they can all search the tunnels, and when they do, there's another earthquake, the earth splits open, and they all fall through. Nadia has another seizure, and after fighting a bunch of deep stalkers and spiders, they find a lyrium-infused chamber with a mosaic depicting wolves, and it says, "Guide me on the path that splits the land between the sun and moon." Drayden figures out that the mosaic actually opens up a portal. Davrin goes down another tunnel in the deep roads, while Drayden and Nadia go through the portal. And that's episode 3.
Okay, so I have lots of thoughts on episode 3.
Go ahead.
Number 1 is just the crush on Davrin is always, yes, very, very real. Another thing of like, do you think the Inquisition is officially around? Because these kind of imply that it is.
Yes. I mean, I think that the Inquisition is around no matter what choice you make. It's just not what it was. Mm-hmm. And I think that the Inquisition is not like this huge force with soldiers and people. I think it's the Inquisitor and a few of their inner circle.
You guess because that's not one of the choices we get to import, whether or not.
Yes, it is.
It is, whether or not we disbanded or put them under Divine Victoria.
Yeah, because like if they're under Divine Victoria, like they're definitely around. And if I feel like if they disbanded, like, okay, Liliana and, well, if she's not divine, and the Inquisitor, like they're still kicking, they're still doing stuff. They're working with Varric to try to find Solus. Like if they're disbanded, and if they're working under the divine, I find it hard to believe that any divine would just let this threat of Solus go.
Yeah. Someone was talking about that, like, they're like, why is Varric the one leading all of this instead of like the Inquisitor looking for Solus?
Because the Inquisitor can't. They're so conspicuous.
Right. And I think it comes down to the fact someone on Twitter or Reddit or something was talking about the fact that the Inquisitor, at this point, if Josie is still doing this, she is like, okay, Inquisitor, you don't get to go gallivanting around anymore. You have to come with me so that we can convince the powers that be in Thetis that this is a real threat.
Yeah.
Because they're going to listen to you.
Yeah.
And
the Inquisitor is the only person they're going to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, it's doubtful.
Right.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. The Inquisitor is far too conspicuous of a face. Every person in Thetis knows what the Inquisitor looks like. There's no possible way that they would be able to do what Varric's doing.
No. And so I think the Inquisitor is going to come in a like really big way, but like Varric, it's kind of like I was talking about scouting out the area first. Varric and Harding are both kind of looking so that when the Inquisitor gets to Devent, they're like, okay, here's the deal. Here's Solus. Here's what's going on.
Yeah. Just to move on a little bit from this conversation, the thing that I really love about this episode is we get a little bit of Davrin's character, and he seems to be an elfy elf because, you know, he's like freaked out when she mentions the dread wolf, and he's like, absolutely not. And then when they depart, he's like, may Andrew guide your steps, and like he has the knowledge about the Evanuris, and so it makes me feel like, okay, yes, Davrin knows the elven lore, and I'm really digging that.
Yeah, we're gonna have 2 elfy elves.
Yes,
which we haven't really had an elfy elf since Meryl. Because we have Vallana and we have Meryl. Those are our elfy elf companions. Well, I guess you can't get any elfier than Solus.
I do not count Solus as an elfy elf.
Okay.
Solus is
Solus.
Solus is Solus, but I do feel like I guess when people say elfy elf, they mean Dalish, and Solus is not Dalish, like obviously. So that's where I'm at. Someone
who, because we normally get like we've had an Antivan Crow, which probably classifies as a city elf, even though I think Severin does have ties to the Dalish in his backstory.
Yeah, his mother was Dalish, I think, but he grew up in Antiva City where she was a prostitute working, and he worked with the Crows, so he's very much a city elf.
Fenris has a little bit of interaction with the Dalish when he escapes. Like, he finds a little bit of refuge with them.
But he's not a Dalish. Like, he doesn't grow up Dalish.
No. Meryl is, and then Sarah is Sarah. So yeah, I think even if Sarah grew up Dalish, she still wouldn't consider herself Dalish.
I agree. But let's get back into the show with our mid-break.
All right.
What is this? A new book? All this shit is weird. Oh, Varric, that is a terrible title. What are you even thinking?
That book you were reading this morning, Assyrian Spear. I don't think he had a spear in the legends.
He does in this one. Read the description.
Andraste knelt before no man but her maker. But she hadn't counted on the Archon Hessarian. Can Hessarian penetrate the tight-knit defenses of the warrior prophetess? Will she be prepared to face the full blast of his power? Wait a minute. Isabella, this is a vulgar thing.
You want to borrow it?
No!
You sure? It has pictures.
Not listening, I'm not listening.
Varric, does Hawk ever autograph books?
Why? Doesn't your copy of The Tale of the Champion have a big hole in it?
Yes, but it could also have Hawk's signature on it.
Welcome to the middle of the show where we take time to thank our patrons. Thank you to all of our patrons who support us. Thank you to our first patrons, Genesis and Lisa M. If you'd like to support us, you can do so at patreon.com/DALorecast. You can find that link in the episode description on our website. If you can't support us on Patreon, we totally get that. Another great way to support us is to leave us ratings and reviews on Apple and Spotify. If you leave us 5 stars on Apple and a kind review, or 5 stars on Spotify and a comment, or question on the episode, we will read it out on the future episode of the show. And so today I have a comment from our Isabella character deep dive. This comes from Matthias H. This says, big thanks to the Cups for making this podcast, especially for the summary of all the books and stories which are relevant to the Veilguard. Looking forward to the next episodes. Thank you so much for that comment and the review. We greatly appreciate it. We too are so excited for the Veilguard, which came out today. Other than that, you can come hang out with us on the Discord. We do have spoiler channels for the Veilguard on the Discord, so if you want to come and talk about stuff with spoilers, there are channels for that. But also, if you want to come and just talk about stuff free of spoilers, we have very strict no spoiler rules outside of our spoiler channels. So if you want to come talk and avoid spoilers, that's a great place to do it. And I think that's all I have for the mid-break.
All right, let's get back into it.
The past years have been so busy. We have earned at least a few moments of rest. A calm night out sounds... Oh, bravo! Bravo! Was the woman in gold playing a king? Who was the man in feathers? Oh, it's all very simple. The first actor's mask is determined by... well, I will lend you the program guide. But tell me, did you enjoy the performance? That was one of the greatest things I've ever seen. Truly. That part with the glycerin, and they actually set fire to... Yes, I truly enjoyed it. Then I call tonight a great success.
I've got some of it written down now.
Give it here. Her breasts strained against the leather jerkin like two wild stallions corralled against their will. She pounced, the smooth moves of a jungle cat, and locked her thighs around Donnick's waist. He...
What?
Nothing. What is that?
Shh. Isabella just thought she'd celebrate your love affair with a written dedication.
It's friend fiction. I do it out of love.
I will never, ever be clean again.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is bad.
All right, so let's get back into this one, and we're going to go to episode 4, which is titled Beyond the Veil. And I do feel like this one's a little bit longer because, as you can imagine, they go to the Fade. So it's not a piece of Dragon Age media if we don't go to the Fade. So this episode opens with Bellara being chased by Tevinter Templars in Arlathan Forest. She jumps through the portal that Nadia and Drayden were just about to jump through, but the Templar follows them. He turns out to be interested in hunting veil jumpers and looting elven artifacts. Drayden throws a grenade to distract him, and Bellara animates the trees using a magical amulet, which allows the three of them to escape to a small area that's been spared from the anomalies of a forest. They just have to walk on water and jump off a waterfall to get to it, though. No big deal, right? Once they get to the bubble, they introduce each other, and Nadia tells Bellara about Elio and their attempt to get him back. She then uses an ancient elven device that she claims will act as a guide when they enter the Fade. The Flicker is what it's called, but they don't know how to use it, and so they go to a lyrium field, which I'm not really sure what that means. I kind of interpret it as a place where there's just a lot of lyrium effects, after effects, because lyrium doesn't just like grow on the ground.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. I thought that lyrium really only grows in the deep roads.
Yes,
Okay.
That is correct. So anyway, the veil is thin there, as you can possibly imagine. But when they do get there, Bellara cannot find a Fade spark to ignite the artifact. Drayden tries and is somehow able to, which is when they reveal that they've been hearing voices from the Fade their whole entire life. They then get to the Fade, but Drayden and Bellara have lost Nadia. Flicker senses a dark danger surrounding her, and Nadia, on the other hand, is seeing spirits who are taking the form of all of her loved ones who have died. Her mom, her friend Vic, etc. And then Elio appears and directs her to find him via an obsidian bridge. He's mad that it has taken so long for her to find him. And he says he can't leave because he, quote, cast a spell disguising himself as an inhabitant of the Fade. For me, when I heard this, demon alarm bells are ringing, like, everywhere.
Well,
which we'll get into at the end. But the only way Elio can leave, allegedly, is if he destroys the font that he used to disguise himself, which conveniently is located in the Black City. The Templar, quote unquote, catches up with them and kills, quote unquote, Fade Elio. That's when Drayden and Bellara find Nadia. They don't see Fade Elio's body, though Nadia is hysterically crying. The Fade Templar starts raising an army of spirits and demons, and they run into some kind of storm in the Fade. Flicker leads the way to a veil fluctuation, which Bellara uses to create a tear to take them back. Bellara sends Drayden and Nadia on first, and the Templar is like right there. He kills Flicker, which is sad, and Drayden and Nadia go through the veil tear, and they land in Parvalen. And they don't know if Bellara survives, though we do know that she does. And that's episode 4.
Yeah, this was such an interesting episode to me because it felt like such a Dragon Age Origins callback.
Yeah.
Especially with like the Fade Templar, because obviously if you have played the Mage Origin, one of the people that you can encounter that in the Fade is a spirit of victory.
Valor.
Spirit of valor. And he looks like a Templar.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm listening to this and reading the transcript and all of that, I just picture this spirit of valor is the one that's like a corrupted spirit of valor.
That's fair. I don't disagree with that. I didn't particularly like this episode. It was fine. I just get tired of going to the Fade, as you know. So yeah, this one wasn't my favorite. Bellara is very quirky, very cute, very like almost manic pixie dream girl a little bit in this, but like not in a bad way. Like I say that in a good way. So I don't know. I feel like we didn't get as much of her character in this one as we've gotten from some of the others. I feel like this episode really highlighted the veil jumpers specifically, but I didn't feel like we got a ton of her personality.
Which makes me think that Bellara might have some kind of like bigger role to play. Like they're saving a lot of her personality and her development for later in the game.
Or, as I know everyone is speculating, she might be the mage companion that betrays us. But anyway, I don't want to get too into that. Are we ready to move on to episode number 5?
Mm-hmm.
So this one is actually my favorite episode, I've decided. But this one's called The Scales of Justice. And as you can imagine, they land in Parvalen. This is Tasha's episode. But it starts with Orlesian nobles who are under Tasha's leadership are treasure hunting on Parvalen. And Tasha is actually the only reason they're even allowed to be there, because they're under basically her protection. But one of these Orlesian nobles wants to mutiny against Tosh. Eventually, though, they do find the Temple of the Lost Dragon, where the noble who wanted to mutiny against Tosh steps on a trap and dies. Fortunately, however, the Orlesian Empire paid Tosh to let this noble die, which I just find hilarious. Unfortunately, the other one has betrayed Tosh, and the Qunari are there to arrest them for betrayal and treason because the shrine that they're trying to hunt from is sacred. That's how Tosh connects with Drayden and Nadia, who are also imprisoned when they reach Parvalen. So they're all kind of imprisoned together. Nadia is really struggling with the after effects from the Fade and has been unconscious for 2 days. When she wakes up, Nadia and Tosh actually recognize each other. They have some kind of a history, though we don't get all of the details on that. They do break out of the jail as a dragon attacks. There's a Kunari kid who gets trapped under like a boulder or rock of some kind. Nadia helps them. Somehow she knows the word Kadan. That's never explained. But when the dragon is taken care of, a Kunari captain arrives and tries to imprison them all again. But the child Nadia saved speaks up, and the captain is like shocked basically that she would rescue or help this kid. And so they basically negotiate, like the only way the Kunari captain will let them go is if they go and kill the dragon. And so they go and they do that. They arrive. There's a nest of a bunch of smaller dragons and drakes, I assume. They leave, or they use the gatlock to make the dragons dizzy and confused. Then Tosh puts 100 pounds of gatlock on her back so that she can jump on the dragon, and the Kunari can fire the cannons at the dragon, exploding the gatlock and killing the dragon. And surprisingly, this actually works. And that's the end of the episode.
Yeah, obviously we know like the Pentagast family is like renowned dragon hunters, and you really see that in Dawn of the Seeker of like how Cassandra knows like exactly where to hit a dragon to bring it down and all kinds of things like that. But this was like, I just feel like it's that kind of meme of Obi-Wan Kenobi leaving General Grievous and just being like so uncivilized.
Yes.
Would be Cassandra's reaction to taking down this dragon this way.
I do agree with that. But this episode, I really felt like Tosh, we got to see more of her, and we didn't know anything about her basically at all before this episode. And I really enjoyed it. I felt like she was... I don't even know what the characteristics I would use to describe her are, but as you all know, I have long been a let me romance Lucanus. But this episode made me rethink that a little bit, because maybe I want to romance Tosh now. I don't know. We'll see. I do have some lore thoughts on this one in regard to the dragons, which we'll talk about at the end with the lore discrepancy section.
It is interesting that Nadia knows all of this stuff about the Kunari. I mean, I guess like being into Ventur, you would have more exposure to Kunari culture, so maybe that is. But you're right, like it's never explained, and the Kun as a whole, as a society, has always been very mysterious to us because we've been in Southern Thetis, but this is Northern Thetis, which is very different.
True, and I guess if Nadia knows Tosh and they have a history, maybe that's how she knows so much about the Kunari.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and like, we still don't know whether Tosh is truly Vashoth or not. To me, this episode makes me lean more toward, okay, maybe they are still technically part of the Kun.
Right.
All right, so episode 6 is titled The Bride Wears Armor. Nadia, Drayden, and Tosh wash up on the shores of Ravane, where bounty hunters are waiting for them. They easily dispatch them and decide that they need to find a good hiding spot. Drayden suggests Antiva, because that's where they're from. Tosh stays behind. Meanwhile, in Antiva, Lord Borgiani is hosting a wedding feast for his daughter Lilimar. Unfortunately, he has also been poisoned by an Antivan crow, Lucanus de la Morte, and another earthquake happens, and somehow Lucanus seems to like transport back to the wedding hall right after he kills the Lord. And it's very dramatic, and the scene kind of cuts off and goes back to Nadia and Drayden arriving in Antiva near Drayden's family home, where they reveal that they're from House Amato and they've changed their name. But almost nobody's in the house. The family crest is split, the grounds are chaotic, Drayden is concerned. And it turns out that Drayden's nursemaid is one of the only people there. Her name's Eliza. And the family was killed, most of the family was killed in the night about a year ago at the hands of the Borgianis. Drayden is convinced that their family never wanted them, but Eliza disagrees. Lucanus also disagrees. He shows up and they all continue arguing. And it comes out that Lucanus had been hired by Drayden's father for protection. However, it gets kind of messy because House Borgiani has followed Lucanus back to House Amato's house. And so they're outside right now and they all have to fight. And so they do. They fight them. They use ghosts. They use a Mabari named Ophelia. They win the fight. It's fine. But in the end, in the ensuing chaos, Drayden does get injured and poisoned. And that's kind of where this episode cuts off.
Yeah. Again, Antivan Crow content just is being superior in Dragon Age right now.
I know.
Like, I am still pretty hard set on starting the game as a warden, but all of the Antivan Crow content that I've gotten in this series, book club series, has strongly considered that Antivan Crow might be my second playthrough.
Yeah, I lean more toward Antivan Crow for my first playthrough. We'll see. I still don't know, but that's where I'm at. I really liked this episode. I felt like it was fun to get more information about the crows, about Antiva, because like when Lucanus goes and kills Lord Borgiani, he's like, well, can you at least tell me her name? And he does, and he's like, oh God, Adela Morte, what did I do, basically? So it's just funny to see how the reaction to him is different in Antiva versus Teventer.
Yeah. Also, as is the requirement of this podcast, whenever we talk about the Antivan Crows, just a little bit of Assassin Creed, the Borgianis or whatever is so close to Borgia.
I know.
I continue to be intrigued by Lucanus and whatever is going on with, spoiler alert if you don't want any kind of spoilers. So here's your warning, with spite, and all of that kind of things, and these weird powers that Lucanus seems to have.
True. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how that interacts. But let's get on to episode 7, because Drayden is dying right now. Lucanus kind of gives Drayden as much first aid as is possible, but Lucanus realizes that they've been poisoned by the blood of the Black Rot, which is a poison that can only be cured through necromancy. And so Nadia is determined to help and takes them to Navarra, riding for a fortnight, 2 weeks, in search of a necromancer. In the middle of the storm, she stumbles upon Emmerich Volkaren, a Morn Watcher of the Mortalitasi, who offers his services. Before he can complete the ritual that would save Drayden's life, however, Sylvans attack and break the ankle of Emmerich's travel companion, Role, and it forces the group to take refuge in a seemingly abandoned castle. Anytime I say the word seemingly, you know shit's about to go down, and this is no exception. Because the castle is occupied by somebody named Pascal de la Forza and his sister Spinella. As Emmerich cures Drayden, Nadia and Role are drugged by Pascal and Spinella, who are in fact abominations, and are taken to their crypt. So Emmerich and Drayden do manage to stop them, but Nadia follows the apparition of Elio that has appeared, and she disappears. And that's the end of this episode.
Yeah, it was very much a transitional episode. I mean, obviously the big reveal of like Elio's apparition at the end is like a big like moving in there. But other than that, I feel like we have to talk about
Manfred. Yeah.
And just, is he gonna talk or is he just gonna make sounds the whole time?
I don't know. I have seen the theory that when they get to the lighthouse in the Fade, that he'll be able to speak.
Similar to how, like, if you take Anders into any Fade mission, like, Justice takes over.
Yes.
And you have, like,
I don't know if that's going to be accurate, though. I don't know. I do think it's funny that they hired Matthew Mercer to play Manfred, who just grunts and gurgles and squeaks the whole time. That would be hysterical to me.
Right. But, I mean, he does a lot of that on Critical Role.
I know.
So.
But I liked Manfred a lot. And it was so funny to me when Nadia is really one for nicknames. She calls him Bones at one point, and he's just like angrily growling. And she's like, what the hell is happening? And Emmerich's like, oh, he doesn't like nicknames.
Also, like, Emmerich continues to be like the dapper gentleman, and like I just feel like we haven't gotten a dapper gentleman in Dragon Age yet for like
True.
a companion. I want so badly for Emmerich to invite Solus to tea.
Yeah, that would be hilarious.
Because Emmerich drinks tea.
Oh, for sure. And we all know Solus hates tea.
Correct.
So, okay, let's get into episode 8, which is titled All Roads Lead Home. So, we're still in Navarra at the beginning, and Emmerich basically is asking Drayden, like, who is Elio? And Emmerich reveals that Elio's apparition spirit is not at all human. There's nothing human within him. Spoiler alert, he is a demon. Which, if you've been paying attention, you can kind of guess. There are, in each episode, I feel like more and more hints that Elio is a demon. At the beginning, I was like, oh no, maybe he really is in the Fade. At this point, at the end, he's not. Emmerich also says that he heard Elio say that he was taking Nadia home, aka to Minrathous, and so Drayden goes to Minrathous. And then we switch to Elio and Nadia, who seem to be in the Fade again, going to Minrathous via the Fade. I'm unsure if they're in the Fade physically or not. It's a little bit confusing. But regardless, Elio is super pissed off that it's taken her this long to find him again. And they go through a portal and they end up in Nadia's home, the catacombs of Minrathous, really her childhood home. And then we switch to Nev, Harding, and Varric are in a bar called the Tattered Veil, discussing the anomalies in Thetis and their lack of leads on Solus when Drayden shows up. Nev had also been looking for Nadia after her theft of the Eye of Cthiska in episode 1. Drayden is awestruck of Varric, which is hilarious to me, and then Harding, of course, recognizes Drayden. After they catch up and make introductions, they do go looking for Nadia, who's currently being tormented by Demon Elio. He's forcing her to relive her worst nightmares of her childhood and again attacks her verbally about not coming to him sooner. Nev and company find out that Nadia grew up in the Salts, which is a slum in Tevinter where a lot of people died due to a mold infestation that the owners ignored. Nadia's father died in this, and the house that was Nadia's had access to the catacombs underneath it. And so we go back to Demon Elio, who is trying to convince Nadia to allow him to possess her fully. He pulls out all the manipulation tactics, and just as she agrees to let him possess her, Drayden shows up and spills the beans that you're a demon. Elio is just a demon. Real Elio is no longer in existence. That's when Demon Elio reveals himself as Mayror, and the party fights it. Nadia realizes that this demon Mayror, however, was also in the catacombs when she was a child. And so this demon followed her in the dark as a child and has been haunting her. And not only that, but Mayror is the one that killed Elio in the Fade. During the fight, Nadia gets seriously injured. She doesn't die, but the damage is severe enough that she's probably never going to be able to be a fighter and an adventurer ever again. And so after she recovers a little bit, they have a wake for Elio with Nadia, Nev, Harding, Varric, and Drayden present, which only one of them ever even met or knew Elio, which I just find humorous.
Right, that is hilarious. But the more I thought about it, I was like, the one person who I would want to maybe just be a rando at a funeral
is
Varric. Like, I just feel like he would be a very comforting presence.
I do also feel like he could get up there and tell a story like, oh, well, I've heard you say this, this, and this about him. So that's fair. That's a fair point. It was just funny to me. But anyway, the series ends with Drayden and Nadia retiring and vowing to go somewhere away from Tevinter, and possibly even to build a new estate that will help anybody who has been displaced by the anomalies in Thetis.
Yeah, I really liked this ending of this series in this episode. I thought this was a good wrap up, and I thought it was a good wrap up in a way of like, I would be okay if Nadia showed up in the Veilguard. And I would be okay if she didn't, because there is this wrap up and this symbolism of like, I'm done. Like, I'm going to go live in my sea cottage happily ever after. I know she's not going to a sea cottage, but I just made that up. But like, I'm going to go live in seclusion, and, you know, we'll be a place of refuge so that people have a safe place to go.
Yeah.
I really like that they gave us this character that is not going to be in perpetual involvement in all the problems of Thetis.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot.
Just there's a lot of lore stuff that I want to talk about. And so I don't have a lot about like this episode specifically. Other than like, I love Nev's like, I know everything, or like just that symbol like, oh, I hear everything, I know everything. Oh, you know, there's nothing I can't do.
She's so no nonsense, and she's so competent.
Yes.
Like it. Yes, I like her a lot.
Yes, which we have a lot of talented companions in Dragon Age, but we don't have a lot of like just what I would describe as necessarily competent
Like
companions.
I'm good at what I do, and nobody can say otherwise kind
Correct.
of companions. Yeah, like you've got Cassandra, you've got Vivian. Even Liliana sometimes is like, you're a good spy master, but like you really miss this really big side, you know, of Solus and everything. So
Correct.
I feel you on that.
So the last thing that I want to say before we kind of can get into some overarching lore things that I want to talk about is that I love a good language reference. So Mayor is Latin.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what it means?
No, I don't know Latin.
It means grief, sadness, sorrow, mourning, or lamentation.
Interesting.
So I just like those. I like when language things really hit it on the nose.
Let's talk about our analysis. So something that I do think is funny is that Nadia, like Varric, has nicknames for people. As we mentioned earlier, Manfred's nickname, which he hated, is Bones. And Books is Drayden's nickname. And then for Davrin, she has Captain Shoulders, which I thought was hilarious. And I think that's all of them. I didn't dive too deeply into looking for that. So if there's one I've missed, let us know.
Yeah, I just really laughed at Captain Shoulders because of just so many times we've been told people have broad shoulders when they don't have broad shoulders. But if you look at Davrin, like, yes, he has broad shoulders.
Yeah, for sure. Moving on a little bit, another thing that I was just like, I'm in love with this is the Qunari pyramids are mentioned, which is a deep cut in the lore. So I'm hopeful we get a lot more Qunari content in this game, but we'll see. And then I want to talk about Nadia being possessed before we get into the lore discrepancies. Because there are a lot of things in this series that make me think Nadia has been possessed by Mayror this whole entire time. Or at least we know she's being followed and haunted by Mayror this whole entire time. And so in episode 4, Drayden and Nadia are arguing and they're like, great maker, I know you're hurt and broken, but you just push too far sometimes. It's not right the way you explode and thrust your pain on everyone else. And Nadia's like, well, what do you even know of pain, of loss? Like, you think because people thought you were a peculiar child that you had it bad? You think being an outcast even compares to losing everyone you've ever loved? And Drayden's like, Nadia, like this, why are you being so cruel? And she's like, because this is who I am. Don't you understand? I'm irredeemable. I'm a blight of pain and darkness. And if you allow yourself to get close to me, you're going to die too. And so they have that fight. And then in episode 6, Drayden talks about the Somniari, the dreamers. And Nadia's like, yeah, I've heard that. What about it? And Drayden basically is like, well, you know, there's skilled mages that can enter the Fade, but sometimes it just refers to people whose mind wanders the Fade. And Nadia's like, do you think that's what's happening to me? And Drayden says, I suspect that whatever happened in there between you and Elio created some kind of connection, allowing him to find you when you sleep. But it's the severity of your pain, your sorrow that worries me. And Nadia's like, why? And Drayden says, because dreamers also attract demons. And Nadia says, what are you saying? And eventually Drayden says, I think the painful emotions you're experiencing in these dreams are a reflection of what Elio is feeling on the other side. And if they keep getting stronger, and Nadia says, then whatever danger stalks him is getting closer. And Drayden says, yeah, something like that. And then in the last episode, Nadia says, and for everyone I've ever lost because of what you put into my heart when I was a child, speaking to the demon directly.
So yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about this. I definitely think Nadia is, at least, as you said, haunted. Like, is haunted by this demon that stalks her from the very beginning, as she's a child lost in the catacombs. Lost so much that this demon made it impossible for Nadia's father to find her. But I'm reminded of something Keeper Marathari says in Dragon Age 2 when talking about Fainreal. And she says a possessed dreamer would be a horror, like something about like a horror upon the world and which the world has never seen.
Mm-hmm.
A possessed dreamer. And we know that Elio is a descendant of a very powerful dreamer.
Yeah.
So it's possible that he has some of those powers, and like, so it's possible this demon and why it's so complex and so powerful is because
of Elio. Yeah, I think that's a very likely possibility.
And I just remembered that as we were talking about that. I was like, oh yeah, like that's the whole reason you have to go into the fate. I mean, it's so bad that Marathari's like, you have to kill him and make him tranquil if he gets possessed. Like, it cannot happen.
Yeah, true.
So I just wonder about that, but I don't think Nadia herself is possessed.
Mm-hmm. I think she's definitely affected by the demon. And I think that the demon has been affecting her for so long that it's become her entire personality, or at least it's affected her entire personality. Like the anger, the irrationality, all of that, I think comes from the demon.
I think I would agree with that. And like, I loved in like the beginning of the last episode when Emmerich is talking about how he knows that Elio was not human. And he's talking about like some like real, I wouldn't say deep cut, but some like real like back to Dragon Age Origins lore about demon or spirits, and demons only mimic what the material plane can create.
Yes.
And he like bringing all that, it's like, I don't see the same basically like spark or flicker of life in Elio that I do in a human.
Mm-hmm.
And I just loved that kind of explanation of that. And I think that this demon is so drawn to Nadia because there is so much grief. There is so much sorrow in her that he's able to exploit it.
Right. And I mean, we've learned this lesson from Kirkwall already, you know. But I think that's a good discussion on the demon. So let's move on to the lore discrepancies before I break our hearts with the last thing I have to say. And I just let's list them out and then we can discuss. So the first thing, and these are not in order, but Emmerich says by Jove, which if you know the history of that slang, it means Jesus. So Jesus, Christianity, and Dragon Age confirmed. Please
Maybe?
God, no. And then I think the biggest one is gender and dragons. So in Tasha's episode, Tasha has a comment where she says, there, look, the dragon's lair is across that shore. She'll be asleep at this hour. And Drayden says, she, and Tosh says, the ridges and coloration of her spine. When she attacked, I got a good look, which is not how gender works with dragons in Dragon Age. All high dragons are female, and then like drakes are male. So there's not, the color and ridges of the spine has no effect on whether or not they're male or female. Mm-hmm. So that's a big one. And I did feel like also Tasha's episode, even though I liked it, had the most lore discrepancies, because there's also a comment where I think it is Tosh, where she's basically like, yeah, we hate the Kunari rules, but we love their guns. They don't have guns. They have gunpowder, but they don't have guns, at least not yet.
Yeah, I mean, cannons. Would a cannon be a gun?
I don't think so.
Okay.
A cannon is a cannon.
Right.
Like, I feel like gun implies handheld. You can't hold a cannon.
That's fair.
And then another thing is that Drayden refers to the Fates in episode 4. And I'm like, the Fates? Like, that's never been a thing in Dragon Age as far as I'm aware of. And then the last lore discrepancy that I have is repeatedly that Teventer Templar calls Balara Rabbit, which is actually an Orlesian slur for elves. So that was interesting to me. I don't know if that's something that they'll extend to Teventer. I would imagine it wouldn't make much sense since elves are slaves in Teventer, because they see, at least in Orlais, they see Rabbit as like the better version of Knife Ear. Like, you're less racist if you use Rabbit instead of Knife Ear. So I would imagine nobody in Teventer is less racist against elves. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know. So those are the lore discrepancies. Do you have thoughts?
Yeah, just the one that, like, the dragons things, yeah, I get that. But the thing of, like, Drayden saying the Fates really gets me, because there's never really been this idea of, like, determined timeline or determined future in Dragon Age. Like, everything has always been like, you're making this choice. This is a free will kind of moment. Like, this is a defining moment. It's not that, like, oh, fate led me to you. It's like, oh, maybe the maker led me to you, but
or
not,
whatever god I believe in.
Right, but it's not like this idea of this route was predetermined or determined forever.
And if it was determined by one of the gods.
Right.
Yeah.
In that moment.
Yeah, I do think, I agree with you. I thought that comment was odd. So there were a lot of lore discrepancies in the show, and I think you can kind of tell that it was contracted out, the writing. But I do feel like they still did a really good job. Like, for people who are not writers at BioWare, I feel like there would have been, I would have expected a lot more lore discrepancies. So I feel like they still did a good job. And the thing I think about with this audio drama is the sound design was so good. Like, it almost really and truly felt like a show. Like I was watching something, just there was no visual. The background noises and everything was really excellent. So I have to give props to that.
Yeah. I have one little, like, lore thing I want to talk about before we wrap up. In the anomalies, we get earthquakes in there, and I just think that's so interesting, because the only time that we've ever even actually had quake or earthquakes in Dragon Age is during the Descent DLC. With the Titan. So I just want to shout out that was an awesome thing that made me think Titans, and I don't think I'll be able to take it if we have to deal with the Evanuris and the Titans in the same game.
I don't want to think about that, number one. But number two, agree. And there are earthquakes happening in multiple episodes, so that it's a little frightening. But the last thing I want to leave us with is heartbreaking. And I saved it for last so that you can all go home and cry after this. So at the end, when Drayden tells Varric about Elio being trapped in the Fade, Varric says, quote, "For the love of Nugs, how could anyone survive in the Fade for so long?" End quote. Which, if you leave Hawke in the Fade, is just really sad, and is like, okay, well, Varric's given up on his friend, and he thinks Hawke is for sure dead.
Well, on that note, thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. You can find us on Twitter at DA Lorecast.
If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, join our Cups Podcasting and More Discord server. It's easily the best place on the internet. You can also support us financially through our Patreon. You can find us there on patreon.com/DragonAgeLorecast.
The Dragon Age Lorecast is part of the Robots Radio Network. For more information about the Robots Radio Network, join the Discord server via the link in our episode description.
If you enjoyed the show or learned something new today, please subscribe, leave us a review, and join the Patreon. And if you enjoyed our intro and outro music, give a big thank you to Pipe Man Studios. Thank you, Pipe Man. Thanks again for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time.
Have you ever wanted to deep dive into the lore and stories behind all your favorite Marvel movies? Then do we have the show for you? I'm Captain Shenko.
And I'm Psych88. Join us as we dissect the media megalith that is the MCU. We'll talk about the origin stories, the fights, and everything in between.
The MCU Lorecast releases on all major podcasting platforms on Mondays as part of the Robots Radio Rocket Club and can be found on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.